Indian Lake. It's 8 o'clock.
Good morning. This is Northern Light for Monday, October 30th. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe.
Canadian workers at the St. Lawrence Seaway are back on the job today. The union reached a tentative agreement yesterday after going on strike last week. Also, recycling advocates say they're encouraged by a hearing on a new bill that would reduce plastic packaging by 50% in New York over the next decade.
Reduction of plastics is far more important than recycling of plastics because plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure.
We'll hear from author Alice Green. She's out with a new memoir on growing up black in a small mining town on Lake Champlain and how her experiences have shaped the rest of her life.
The town was totally white. It was almost totally Catholic. For us, who were neither, it was extremely challenging.
And we'll meet Casey Ritter, who's been hand-carving and painting signs for Public Works in Plattsburgh since 1985, and a little music and a look at events going on throughout the region. All of that's coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us.
Broadcast of Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio is supported by Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake, hosting their new In the Adirondack Library online series each month. Details at the adkx.org. And by Apothecary Chocolates, making gourmet chocolates by hand from all natural herbs, botanicals, and tree syrups. apothecarychocolates.com.
This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe. Canadian St. Lawrence Seaway workers are back on the job today after their union reached a tentative agreement over the weekend. Catherine Wheeler reports cargo ships will now be able to get in and out.
The week-long strike shut down the vital shipping waterway that connects the Atlantic Ocean with the upper Great Lakes. The ships on the Seaway carry cargo like fuel and grain. A long strike could have had a major impact on both the U.S. and Canada. The union that represents the Seaway workers said in a statement that they won't be releasing any details about the tentative agreement until it's been shared with workers and ratified. A vote will be scheduled in the coming days. Workers were looking for higher wages in their new contract. The St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation says it will begin passing ships today. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
If you look at the demographics of the North Country, it's a predominantly white place. Census data shows that 88% of residents identify as Caucasian. That can make growing up here as a person of color really difficult, but we don't hear those stories very often. Tomorrow, we'll hear about the Ku Klux Klan's presence in the North Country and how it made the region whiter than it otherwise would have been. Today, we'll hear from Alice Green, a black woman who grew up in the 1950s and 60s in a small mining town on Lake Champlain. Amy Feiereisel has her story.
Today, Alice Green is a lifelong activist and academic. She has a doctorate in criminal justice and has worked with Albany's police department on equity and diversity issues. But in 1948, Green was just 7 years old and had just moved to the North Country with her parents and 5 siblings. Her father had found a job with Republic Steel, working in a blasting furnace. Green says they moved largely as a way to escape the Deep South.
Because of Jim Crow segregation and also the criminal justice system itself.
The Witherby Sherman mine was one of the largest pre-war producers of iron ore in the country. Its hub was Port Henry, and there was actually a black community there, about 13 families living in company housing, all on the same street.
Elizabeth Street in Port Henry is where everybody lived. They developed this community. They even established a church.
But that housing was full when Green's father was hired, and they got housing in Witherby, a small town 5 miles away. It was full of other mine workers, many first-generation immigrants from Europe. The Greens were one of 2 black families there.
The town was totally white. It was almost totally Catholic. And for us, who were neither, it was extremely challenging.
Green says there were other Black people scattered around the North Country, cooks in Lake Placid, military men in Plattsburgh, apple pickers in Peru, but they rarely saw them. Green says her family always felt like outsiders in Witherby. Green's new memoir is called Outsider. She was inspired to write it after attending a high school reunion. She says former classmates waxed poetic about how when they'd grown up, racial tensions didn't exist. Green was floored. That hadn't been the story of her Adirondack childhood, which she says was full of subtle racism.
They don't come to your house and, burn crosses and things like that.
It was also blatant racism. She almost never felt welcome. Kids didn't invite her to birthday parties, and racist language was everywhere, even in schoolyard games.
And it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch nigger by his toe. That was so accepted. Everywhere I went, it's not only kids, but adults. They repeated that over and over again.
Nearly a century after the Civil War, Green says life was far from equal. She saw that the summer she was 15 years old, when she and one of her few friends, a next-door neighbor named Myrtle, both got their working papers and found summer jobs as chambermaids down near Paradox Lake.
We were just so excited. We thought we would go and work and be roommates.
They got a ride down to Paradox and met the owner, Mrs. Claudis.
Mrs. Claudis and her family lived in this big, gorgeous apartment.
Mrs. Claudis gestured to Green's friend.
She said, Myrtle, you're going to stay here.
Then she took young Alice to the backyard, where there was an old barn.
She said, this is where you will live. And that was totally confusing to me, because when I walked in, there was nothing there except a cot.
Green learned that other adult Black workers also stayed in the barn, but they worked nights, so Green was left alone.
I would be the only one up in this barn and didn't understand the separation thing quite. It was dark. I was 40 miles from my home, and I could hear my mother saying, stay there, you need to make money. But something else told me that this wasn't right.
She got up as soon as it was light and asked to speak with Mrs. Claudis.
I told her I don't understand why the Black people living in the barn, and that there were bats there, and I want to live with my friend. And she said, you can't do that.
Green quit on the spot. Her friend Myrtle had heard it all.
And she said, well, I quit too. So the two of us gathered our thing. We had no idea how we were going to get home. None whatsoever.
But Green said that didn't matter to her. And she points to that moment as when she learned how to do the right thing, even if it was hard.
I never regretted it. I couldn't get another job. I had to use my old clothes and all that stuff. But I felt good about myself. And that's where a lot of what I do comes from.
Green went to college at SUNY Albany and got her master's in education. After working as a teacher and doing community work in low-income neighborhoods, she got 2 more masters in social work and criminology, then a doctorate in criminal justice. She says most of her education was motivated by a desire to help incarcerated people. She says there have been lots of hard moments in her career, but she's never shied away from them.
I have to confront people, and I can confront anybody. People in power doesn't bother me whatsoever. As long as I think that I'm doing the right thing.
In 1985, Green founded the Center for Law and Justice in Albany, a nonprofit that works to aid incarcerated people and keep new people from entering prisons. She still visits the Adirondacks regularly and has a place in Essex with her husband, which is where we spoke. She says she loves introducing people to the area and enjoying it herself.
And to go places where I wouldn't think I could be when I was growing up. The message that we got was, that's not for you. In Lake Placid especially. Now, I come back to enjoy what was off limits to me.
When people ask Green where she's from, she tells them, the Adirondacks. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio, on the shores of Lake Champlain.
Green's recently released memoir is titled Outsider: Stories of Growing Up Black in the Adirondacks. She previously published a book about her working life, prisons, and civil rights. It's titled We Who Believe in Freedom. You can find links to both books in the online story at ncpr.org. And tomorrow, how the Ku Klux Klan drove Black communities out of the North Country and made it a mostly white place today.
You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio, 10 minutes past 8. Good morning, I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up in just a few minutes, a little bit of music and a look at the community calendar coming up right here on Northern Light.
Dan Duggan out of Lake Clear, and you can check out more of Dan's music, part of the Underscore Project, on our website at ncpr.org/underscore. Northern Light is supported by St. Lawrence Health, whose affiliation with Rochester Regional Health means more patient access to specialty care, stlawrencehealthsystem.org. And the Village Mercantile in Saranac Lake, established in 2011 with a mission of community-fueled solutions with products for home, camp, and gift giving. villagemerc.com. Anything but general.
Recycling advocates say they're encouraged by a joint legislative hearing on a new bill last week. The measure would reduce plastic packaging by 50% in New York over the next decade. Karen DeWitt reports from Albany.
The legislation would phase in reductions in plastic packaging over several years and ban a practice known as chemical recycling. That's where heat or chemical reactions break down some plastic materials so that they can eventually be used for new products. The bill would also ban some toxins now found in packaging, including heavy metals and PFAS chemicals. Assembly Environmental Chair Deborah Glick says there's an urgent need to get a handle on what she says is an excessive use of plastics.
Younger people, our kids, are telling us that we have to do a better job because the world that we are giving them is not something that's sustainable. And they intend to see that we take action and take action promptly.
Judith Ank, a former regional EPA administrator who now heads Bennington College's Beyond Plastics, testified in support of the bill.
And emphasized that reduction of plastics is far more important than recycling of plastics, because plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure. People should keep recycling other materials, but we need to be honest that plastic recycling doesn't work, so we have to reduce it.
Ank says for every 3 pounds of fish in the world's oceans today, there's 1 pound of plastic debris. She says if nothing changes, it's estimated there will be 1 pound of plastics for every pound of fish by 2050. Craig Cookson, with plastic sustainability at the American Chemistry Council, is among those who spoke against the measure. He says instead of mandating a reduction in plastic packaging, he favors improving the recycling markets and better educating the public about recycling. Cookson says consumers want more recycled products.
Industry wants, because their customers are demanding that they have more recycled content in their packaging and products. And so industry is working to get more of that.
Cookson says there's no need for a ban on chemical recycling, which his organization calls advanced recycling. He says the process has been misunderstood and that there is no actual burning involved.
That's a complete mischaracterization of the technology. So these technologies work in a oxygen-deprived or very low oxygen environment, so there is no combustion. And what they're doing is they're using heat or catalyst to take the plastics and break them back down to their basic chemical components. And so that feedstock or that raw material becomes an alternative feedstock to oil and natural gas in the production of new plastics or chemicals again.
Ank and other environmental advocates say it's the chemicals and plastics industry that are mischaracterizing the process.
They say there's no oxygen in the chamber and therefore you don't get a flame, but chemical recycling is an attempt, I underline attempt, to heat plastic at a very high temperature, and typically it gets turned into fossil fuel or synthetic gas. The last thing the world needs is more fossil fuel.
Enck says the fact that the chairs of the state legislature's environmental conservation committees held a day-long hearing is a good sign that there will be a law passed in 2024. She says groups like hers, though, will have to make sure that the final legislation actually does what it says and doesn't include any loopholes. Cookson with the Chemistry Council isn't giving up either.
There's a lot of innings to play in this game.
Senate Environmental Chair Peter Harcum says lawmakers will continue in the coming months to hear from the stakeholders and try to address their concerns as they work toward a final bill. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
The Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital in Plattsburgh is rolling back its masking requirements. Masking is now optional for patients, visitors, and employees. Hospital officials say that's because levels of COVID-19 transmission have decreased in the region. Other North Country hospitals are also relaxing masking guidelines. A CVPH spokesperson said the public can expect masking guidelines to change depending on current conditions like transmission levels or coronavirus outbreak. They say reducing risks for their patients and staff is critical to continuing care.
There are over 100 active cases of lead poisoning in Jefferson County right now, many of them in children. That's according to the County Public Health Department, which has been trying to raise awareness around the issue. Cecilia Worth, a county public health specialist, told WWNY-TV that lead poisoning poses a significant risk to children.
Children are developing and their bodies and brains are growing. So at that age, lead can cause behavioral issues. It can lead to developmental delays. Later in life, you can see issues with children in school, and it can lead to underperformance with school as well.
Health department officials say the most common exposure source is lead-based paint, which is often found in homes over 50 years old. That accounts for much of the North Country's housing stock.
North Country counties are set to receive about $7.5 million from the state to enhance the public safety communication networks used by ambulances and emergency responders. The funding comes as part of a statewide effort to improve emergency communication systems, training, and drills. Some of the funding is dedicated to the adoption of next-generation 911 technologies. You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up in just a minute, we'll meet Casey Ryder, who's made at least 1,000 signs for Plattsburgh over the course of her career. Then stick around after the show for Bird Note. We'll take a look at the difference between how a pileated woodpecker and a nuthatch climb a tree. That's coming up at 8:42. But first, Todd has a look at the weather for us.
Cloudy and a wintry mix. That's what the Weather Service says is the forecast for today and tonight. High around 40, although a little milder, if you can call it that, in Glens Falls and Saratoga Springs. Mid-40s for highs. Northeast winds 5 to 10 miles per hour. Overnight lows tonight dipping into the 20s and 30s with a chance of snow, sleet, rain overnight again tonight as well. Then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, at this point, partly cloudy skies with highs low to mid-40s. Could see a high near 50 on Friday and Saturday. That's the extended forecast. But for today and tonight, light rain or sleet or snow with a high around 40 this afternoon and lows in the 20s and 30s tonight. Right now in Canton, showers and 34 degrees.
You may not know who Casey Ryder is, but if you've ever driven through Plattsburgh, you've seen a lot of her work. She's been hand carving and painting signs for public works and private businesses since 1985. She's the woman behind the City of Plattsburgh signs and the Mountain Lake PBS Welcome Board and countless others. Amy Feiereisel spoke with Ryder in 2019, and here's her North Country at Work story.
Casey Ryder has two nicknames. The first is Plattsburgh's Sign Lady. The second is KC, which has replaced a name most non-Dutch people have trouble with.
Actually, it's Geeske van Ryder, But I got my nickname because nobody could pronounce my name. I'm from Holland originally, and I've been a sign maker at Morrisonville, New York for 35 years.
She's done it all from a tiny little garage off her kitchen. In the center are 2 wooden horses with signs on them.
Well, we're standing in my shop. I exclusively hand carve and hand paint signs, so there's no machines involved, except every now and then a router for an edge or my little jigsaw to cut the signs. So I have a bunch of chisels. I have shelves full of paint.
Right now, there are a couple small wooden signs in the shop, easy to pick up and maneuver. But Casey does a lot bigger, up to 8 by 16 feet. She's behind a lot of town and village signs and those commercial complex boards, which list different businesses. In the early 80s, Casey and her husband moved to Morrisonville, about 7 miles west of Plattsburgh. She was in her late 20s. She took a few sculpture and jewelry classes at SUNY Plattsburgh and fell in love.
I really enjoyed working with my hands. I just very much liked it.
With no woodworking experience, Casey started making signs for a friend's business. After a year, she went solo, finding work by cold calling companies. Then she landed a big project making signs for a developer's apartment buildings and hotels. Once she had a few signs out in the world, they did the advertising for her. That in Casey's confidence.
Actually, I was pretty brass at the time because I would go see a customer and they say, oh, can you do this? And even though I didn't know how to do it at all, I said, oh, yes, of course I can. I would go to the library. We didn't have the computers at that time. I would find out how to do it and do it.
And nothing compared to seeing her work lining familiar streets.
It was really a trip when I first started. You know, I would drive down. Oh, yeah, I did that. It bothers me sometimes when people don't take care of them. It really does. So often I go to the customer back and say, you know, this needs to be cleaned or it needs a fresh coat of paint.
Casey really cares about her signs. She keeps photo albums of the ones she's made, partly to document her work and partly because so many of the signs are gone. She flips through one of the albums.
They go out of business. Like, I'm looking here now. 1, 2, 3, 4, all gone. 5, that one's gone. That one is gone. This one is gone.
Casey never expected to still be making signs. She'd assumed she'd put herself out of business.
It's going to be saturated, right? Everybody's going to have a sign. I was just waiting to see what I was going to do next.
But from the start, Casey had plenty of work. And having her own home-based business is what helped her survive when her husband unexpectedly died in 1987, leaving her alone with 2 young children.
Oh, I am so grateful that I actually found this niche, that I was fortunate to be able to be at home, you know, with my kids and still do what I love doing.
When the kids were little, Casey furiously worked while they were in school and after they went to bed. These days, her schedule is a lot more relaxed, but Casey says she still wakes up excited to work. She does everything, from designing to hand carving the signs to layering on many, many layers of paint. She makes 30 to 40 signs a year, which sell from $150 to $5,000. The more expensive ones are either big or have tricky 23-karat gold leaf lettering.
The copy that is to be gold leafed, you put a certain size on it, which is like a glue. You got to wait for the right tack, and it's never the same. It depends on the weather, whether the tack is right or not. So you got to know exactly, otherwise you drown the gold.
Technology has changed a lot since 1985. Casey started out hand drawing and using wood. Now she designs on the computer and uses high-dimensional urethane, a hard foam material made for signs. But she won't give up hand carving.
It's like meditation. It's like you really get into the zone. It's like you don't have that with a machine. And I know I get a smile on my face. And I know it. I can feel it that I get a smile on my face. I know when I'm in that zone, and it's just a happy feeling.
All of the signs she shows me are impeccable, but there's no particular look. Some are sleek and simple. Others are covered in swirls and curlicues. She creates in the style of her customer. I'm reminded of a chameleon. When asked for favorites, Casey points out an ultra-modern billboard and then an old-timey doctor's sign. Both were a fun challenge, she says. For North Country Public Radio's North Country at Work project, I'm Amy Fireisel in Morrisonville, New York.
You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 8:25. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski here with Todd Moe. Take a look at the community calendar. So many events going on throughout the region, including this evening. A lot of foods end up in landfills every year, representing waste and more methane going into the environment. To reduce that waste here in the North Country, there are 2 free food waste reduction workshops going on this week in Lake Placid and in Plattsburgh. The workshops will cover strategies like composting, recycling, and donation. They're organized by the state and several regional organizations, including Compost for Good. Co-founder Jennifer Perry says the workshops are for anyone interested in reducing food waste.
Maybe you are part of a food pantry and you'd like to make connections to farmers or restaurants to develop strategies to have food donated to your pantry. Maybe you're SUNY Plattsburgh and you know that you spend thousands of dollars on wasted food, so you want to develop some better systems.
Perry says reducing food waste is important because it has a big environmental impacts.
One of the biggest impacts of wasted food is that it goes into the garbage, buried in a landfill, which creates methane. And methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases that there are. And by the EPA standards, there's anywhere from 30 to 40% of our waste stream is organic material and food waste. In my mind, it's this beautiful circle because on one side, you're reducing harmful impacts and damaging an expensive situation. And on the other hand, on multiple levels, you're creating opportunities.
Lake Placid's workshop will be held this afternoon at Lake Placid Pub and Brewery. Plattsburgh's is on Thursday at St. Joseph's Outreach Center Food Pantry. Both start at 5:30. You can find more details at ncpr.org.
27 minutes past 8, and this is North Country Public Radio. A couple of events to put on your calendar. On November 12th, Interwoven, an ensemble that interweaves East and West music, classical Western music, and traditional Asian music. They'll be visiting the Adirondacks. They have a concert presented by Hill and Hollow Music. That's coming up on Sunday, November 12th at 3 in the afternoon at the Saranac Methodist Church on Route 3 in Saranac. Iconic folk songs and historic compositions from Asia, as well as contemporary works that interlace the sounds of East and West. That's the ensemble Interwoven, presented by Hill and Hollow Music. If you want more information, check out the website hillandhollowmusic.org. Also, just a reminder to stop by the St. Lawrence University's Brush Art Gallery. Listening to Water is an ongoing exhibition that continues through December 9th. Listening to Water follows the rivers and streams that flow from the Adirondacks to the confluences with the St. Lawrence River. And check that out. It's ongoing in the Brush Art Gallery at St. Lawrence University in Canton.
And tonight in Saranac Lake, head to the Tri-Lakes Humane Society. They're holding a fundraiser this evening from 7 to 10 for your chance to walk through the haunted Halloween trail. Children under 12 years of age are not permitted, but it should be a spooky time. You can check out more information about their fundraiser at trilakeshumanesociety.petfinder.com.
And that's it for Northern Light on this Monday, October 30th.
Join us later today at lunchtime for Fresh Air. We'll be talking with historian Tanisha Ford about Molly Moon, a black socialite in Harlem who became an instrumental force in funding the civil rights movement. Her opulent parties created a secret financial network for wealthy whites, black elites, and working-class black people. That conversation day between noon and 1 o'clock. Right here on North Country Public Radio. And if you miss an episode of Northern Light, never fear. You can always listen back to the archive any place you get your podcasts. And while you're there, you can subscribe to our other podcasts from NCPR, our daily news roundup, story of the day, and also the storytelling podcast, The Howl. That's everywhere that you get your podcast. Find Northern Lights, Story of the Day, and The Howl. You can also keep up with NCPR throughout the day on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, or send us an email. We're always glad to hear from you. news@ncpr.org. Our theme music is by Danny Thomas. I'm Monica Sandreski.
I'm Todd Moe. Be well.